Hey, Larken Rose here, and this will be a very simple video. I want to ask you a few questions about your moral view of things and what you think about right and wrong relating to two hypothetical scenarios. Scenario one, you're walking down the street, some random guy you don't know jumps out of a car, comes over to you and says, "You're coming with me, get in this car." You don't know why. You didn't do anything. Never seen him before. You're minding your business. Now, you may try to run away. You may not dare to forcibly resist. And so these questions aren't about what do you think you'd be capable of or what might you choose on a practical basis. They're just about morality. What do you think you have the right to do? Do you think you have the right, for example, to run away and say, "I don't know who you are, but I'm leaving, bye"? If you do that and he chases after you and you can't outrun him or escape, do you have the right to use physical force to stop him from taking you hostage? And if you try to do that, you like swing at him or something, and he pulls out a gun, are you obligated to let him kidnap you? Or do you have the right to escalate the use of defensive force to whatever level you have to avoid being taken hostage by that guy? So that's basically it for the first scenario. I will throw in this ridiculous addendum to the first scenario. What if he says, "Hey, I'm just kidnapping you at gunpoint. If you don't like it, you can sue me later"? And he says you can do that. Does that mean you have to let him kidnap you? That you're morally obligated to let him forcibly take you hostage on the idea that maybe later you can sue him? But you certainly shouldn't, defend yourself by force in order to not get kidnapped. Maybe that addendum gave some of you a hint where this was going. Some of you would know where it's going anyway. Scenario number 2. One of the fine men and women in blue, the mindless thugs of the state, decides to accost you out of the blue for whatever reason. You didn't commit a crime, you didn't threaten anybody, you didn't hurt anybody, you're minding your own business. But they bossed you around and you didn't immediately comply. Let's say they said, "Stop and show me your ID" while you're walking down the street, and you said, "I don't actually have to do that, and I don't have to answer your questions." And they say, "You'll be under arrest if you don't do as you say. I'm giving you a lawful order," because they just make shit up and they don't know what any terms mean. They don't know what the law means either. Ever. My furniture knows more about the law than any cop I've ever met. So this cop, completely illegally, demands to detain you and demands to see your ID and have you answer a bunch of questions, and you say no. So he says, "You're under arrest, turn around, put your hands behind your back." Once again, these questions aren't about what would you do for practical reasons, and would you do this and then do that later, and would you dare to run away, would you dare to resist. It's just about what would you have the moral right to do. So question 1, would you have the moral right to say, "You're a fascist psycho, I haven't broken any law, I'm leaving, I'm going to run away, you power-happy psycho, bye"? Would that be morally justified? Not would it be a good idea on a practical basis. Would it be morally justified, or would you be a bad person? Would that be an immoral thing to do to try to escape a completely illegal arrest? Hopefully most people would go, yeah, that would be justified. Probably won't end well, but okay, let's make it a little bit more uncomfortable. If he chases after you and says, "Freeze," tries to tase you or whatever, or he pulls out a gun and says, "You have to stop, you're under arrest." So he's now escalated the threat of violence. If you happen to be armed, are you morally obligated to allow him to falsely arrest you when you didn't commit a crime? What he is doing is illegal. It's not even legalized authoritarian BS. It's all the way illegal, unjustified under the law. He's just on a power trip. He's just a thug who wanted to boss you around and you didn't do what he said, so now he's on a power trip. There's no actual law behind it, but he's wearing that badge and uniform and he's saying, "You have to stop or I'll arrest you." Do you have an obligation to let him illegally take you captive? Do you have a moral obligation? Let's say he pulls out a gun. Let's say you have a gun too. And he says, "If you stop resisting, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. Or I'm going to shoot you if you run away." Would you be morally justified to escalate the use of physical force to whatever level it took to avoid being illegally detained and arrested by this power-happy fascist who doesn't even have the law on his side? Like, that could be a different set of questions when it's legal, immoral, authoritarian aggression. But this isn't even illegal. This is just, he's on a power trip. Now, you may very well say, well, if I resist, it's going to get really bad and they're going to call in a bunch of other pigs and bad things are going to happen and I'll probably end up dead. So I'm going to let him illegally detain me and then sue them later. Like, on a practical basis, that may be a better choice and lots of people may choose to do that. That's not the question. Are you morally obligated to allow him to illegally, unjustifiably kidnap you, basically, take you hostage by force, or by threat of force at least, without any legal justification? If you answered yes, well, you're kind of a slave. If you think you're actually morally obligated to allow yourself to be not even just legally victimized by the state, but illegally victimized by the state and the state thugs, wow, that's a very weird, putting it nicely, moral code that says when they do something that's totally wrong and illegal, you're obligated to let them do that to you. That is the mindset of a slave. Well, if the master accused you of something and then the overseer is whipping you, you're still not justified in resisting because he's the master and that's the overseer, and you have to just take your lashes like a good slave because you can't raise your hand against the overseer or against the master. Certainly you can't do that, no matter how wrong it is, no matter how nasty and unjustified what they're doing is. You certainly can't lift a finger against the master and his enforcers. If you have that mentality, you are absolutely a slave. You are mentally 100% a slave. So, what's the other option? If you don't have a moral obligation to allow yourself to be illegally victimized, then you kind of would be morally justified in doing whatever it takes to resist being immorally and illegally victimized, including escalating the force to a level to resist whatever force they escalate it to. All the way to, if he pulls out of a gun, you would be morally justified in shooting him in the fucking head to stop him from illegally taking you captive. Would you be justified in doing that? Obviously, this is an uncomfortable question and uncomfortable situation for a lot of people to think about. And again, your brain may very well slide into the, well, I wouldn't do that, I'd do this, and try to sue them later. Didn't ask what you would do, I asked what would be morally justified. Either you are obligated to allow yourself to be immorally and illegally victimized by thugs of the state, or you have the right to resist by force if necessary to make that not happen. Which one is it? And most people get uncomfortable at this line of questioning. But they don't get uncomfortable at the first line of questioning. Some random guy stops out and said, "Get in my car." Almost everybody would say, well, if I had a gun and he wouldn't stop and he pulled a gun, I'd blow his damn head off. He's trying to kidnap me and I didn't do anything. Of course I would be justified. Most people seem to have no trouble saying that. So imagine the depth of authoritarian indoctrination that most people have rattling around inside their head when a different scenario where the only difference is that the guy has a badge and uniform, he's still doing something illegal, he's still just committing armed kidnapping without any basis in law or morality. If the only difference is he's wearing a costume and suddenly I don't know how to answer the question, think of what that means about your indoctrination. Random guy trying to forcibly kidnap you at gunpoint with no justification. Almost everybody would go, yeah, I'd have the right to do whatever it took to resist that. Oh, the guy's wearing a badge. Uh-oh. Why uh-oh? He's a person in a costume, and in this scenario, doesn't even have the law on his side. He's just a power-happy thug in a costume. Oh, but don't worry, because the cop will say, oh, if you don't like this, there's civil remedies. And they say this. I've seen plenty of videos where they're completely wrongfully arresting somebody and saying, well, there's civil remedies if we weren't supposed to do this. Yeah, there's a different remedy, which is shooting you in the head. Now, it doesn't go well for the person who does that 9 times out of 10, at least. But again, that's not the question here. Would it be morally justified? Or are you obligated to allow yourself to be abused and illegally victimized and then later beg the system and people who were appointed by the ruling class that sent the thugs to do this to you, beg them to please do something about the fact that their overseer whipped you unfairly? I mean, their law enforcer illegally detained you. So, what are your answers? And way more importantly, do your answers demonstrate that somebody else has a hold of your brain and your perception of reality and your moral code so strongly that even when obvious, undeniable evil is being inflicted on you, you're suddenly uncomfortable about the thought of resisting it if and only if the thug has a badge and a uniform. Because then suddenly your moral sense changes. Well, he's a representative authority. Yeah, in that case, he's breaking the law and being immoral and illegal and several other things. But still, he's the law. We can't raise a finger against the law. Is that what you think? And ponder very carefully, why do you think that? Now, if your answer was, of course I have the right to resist him, just like I would anybody else, for literally trying to kidnap me at gunpoint for no good reason. Okay, at least you're consistent. And sadly, a lot of people won't answer that way. And even a lot of the people who do answer that way will hesitate really long. Well, I would try pretty hard to avoid that. Nah, okay, that wasn't the question. Would you be morally justified? And we've been so trained to think that authority is a real thing, that when a violent thug tries to forcibly kidnap somebody with no moral or even legal basis, even then most people cringe at the idea of the victim of that, saying, nope, you're not doing that to me, buddy. Don't care what costume you wear. If you try to forcibly kidnap me, I'm going to kill you. That is an absolutely moral response. Now, a lot of cases may not end well, so there may be practical reasons to go a different route. But it is absolutely morally justified just as much as if the guy didn't have a badge. And if you're still uncomfortable recognizing that obvious truth, dig deeper into your mentality and your indoctrination and ask yourself, why would you have a different feeling and a different gut response to the exact same scenario if your abuser was wearing a badge? And if you want to know why, you can read The Most Dangerous Superstition, which is on Amazon. But yeah, if you found those questions uncomfortable, take a look inside your own brain and figure out why that was uncomfortable for you. Because it really shouldn't have been. It's not a complicated question. And I bet it wasn't difficult for you to answer the first scenario. Why should it be difficult for you to answer the second when it's the same stinking thing?